Welcome and hello. Thank you very much for joining us for another episode of the Breakout Room, where we go and explore what universal really means, trying to open it up, and especially by using it within the confines of the startup community and startup ecosystem, how we can actually break down what universal means to be more accessible because of the wonderful nature of early adopters or early adopters. Today, we're going to be exploring the branding side of things, but really how to brand and navigate through bias and still be able to have a very strong brand. And we'll be using Femtech as an example as well. And I'd like to welcome our guest, Jennifer Reedie. Hi, Jennifer Reedie. If you can come on and join us, that would be wonderful.
Hi, Cindy.
How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. Nice to be here.
Thank you so much. I'd love to hear a little bit about your creative journey. And if you could tie in
Sure.
just a little bit of the entrepreneurship side that really kind of pushed you to where you are, I'd love to hear it.
Okay. Okay, sure. Well, I went to college for advertising design, basically because I thought that that would be a good path to getting paid for my passion of all things creative. So I like to write, paint, graphic design. So I thought I would enter into the work world there. So my roots are really in advertising. I was part of a global company, one of the top 4 agencies in the world, Publicis, and I was there for 7 years as a managing director and creative director. My journey took me to move into the digital product space at Isobar, and I was the VP product design there, where I built a team of designers, UX, UI, art directors, writers, and I took care of a front-end development team as well. I've also put on my strategy hat and I took a position at Fifth Story as SVP strategy and innovation. I think I seem to really be attracted to companies in their kind of building and growing stage. I like to build and grow my own team, and I'm very much an entrepreneur. So I've also worked on the brand side. So working as a creative director in Tangerine Bank, also at Polyconcept, and most recently at Benchsci, which is an AI startup in the biotech space.
Thank you. And so everything you're kind of talking about really talks to the entrepreneurial mind, right? So there's all these different elements and you're kind of rolling from one to the other, and it's almost interchangeable, but at the same time outside of a box. And I guess that's where I wanted to lead to next is you've been through a number of different scenarios and different companies. What would be the one creative branding big play that you've I guess it's part of an evolution, this creative process and moving, changing people's minds. So what do you think would be the most impactful campaign that inspired you or is inspiring you to do what you do?
Yeah, I think Apple Computers is just such an excellent example. They really focus on their why. That is, why are they in business? And yes, they sell computers, but really they also sell an idea of creativity, of design, of high functioning technology. So they're in business to really kind of create cool tech, and that's what they're passionate about. And it makes people feel like early adopters. It makes them feel like they're part of this club, like something special, and they continue to do that today.
So, and I want to explore that a little bit further. So the idea of that club. So does branding really kind of capture or really try to build that community? Or is it more random? Is there a little bit of a, that there's such followership to Apple products. Is that a recipe, a creative recipe? What is that secret component about creating that followership that is so critical to changing people's opinions?
Yeah, well, I think when a company fully understands the why, is what we say in brand strategy. So why are you in business? If they fully embrace and understand that, then they can articulate that to their customer base. And there are synergies there. There is an affinity to want to be like this brand who has the same kind of values that I have. So they become loyal customers.
Now, I've often said that true change has to be it has to be done at a level or in a way that people don't realize that they're changing, right? So I talk about it from the aspect of the startup ecosystem. It's not about the hiring practices, including all the different faces around the table. It's about ergonomically designing the table and the chairs to be more accessible to a variety of people, and therefore affording a variety of voices into your creative concept, whether that's into product development, into marketing, into whatever aspects it might be. And we take that down even further to say that startups then, because they're surrounded by these early adopters and first followers, are the true I'm going to say soldiers, the true movers of change, of that change dial. So what role can creative branding play in affecting drastic change? So with the breakout room, we try to get people to think differently, and because my perspective is my perspective. I'm a white cis female. That's perspective I bring to the table. So when we bring other people into the table and around it, we create we bring about a more creative thought process. So what role can creative branding play in affecting true change, equal rights, or equal pay, or something that might be a little bit drastic?
I think more and more today brands are taking a stand on the things that they believe in. Dove, for example. When you say role, there are several people that contribute to this, but it's an alignment from the brand itself to want to create awareness, to want to build campaigns around things like Dove. So they create awareness around women of different cultures and different sizes and ages, and that we're all beautiful in our bodies and in the skin that we're in. And we don't need to strive to look one way. So Dove is really leading a conversation of acceptance and bringing awareness and actionable change to our society in that awareness.
It is indeed. I mean, just thinking about the Dove campaigns, they produce videos that are empowering. They promote the brand, but they're more than that, though, right? Because it is something that I have 2 daughters, so they're videos that I've shown to my daughters. They're videos that have elicited an emotional response in me. Like some of them have brought me to tears. So what role then does emotion play in building this brand and building this opportunity?
It's huge, really. That's the goal, is to create an emotional connection between your brand and your customers. And if you can do that, you're going to find that you have, very loyal following, because again, you're on the same page and you have similar values, and there's an affinity there, and that creates a strong bond.
And I talk about the difference between checkbox change and actionable change, and I like to bring it into my role because that's where I'm most comfortable. So I talk about it in terms of the startup ecosystem, and we're watching right now. The funding has dropped from the pre-pandemic down to 2% now, and it's kind of staying there stagnant. At 2% of funding available for women, 0.8% if you're a woman of color. And if you have a visible disability, then it drops down to 0.1%. Yet, at the same time, we are at an all-time high for the number of meetings with investors and the number of checks that are coming through. So if we just do the math, That basically means that these checks are so small that you actually don't even need to be an accredited investor. It's just enough to kind of, put your hat in the game. Or there's just a select few investors that are contributing, and there's no lead investors. So from that standpoint, then I would call that checkbox change. They're really just doing something to pat themselves on the back and say, okay, I did this. How do we use branding as not a weapon to really brand how awesome we are, even though we're not really fulfilling that awesome quota? How do we use branding for good rather than evil? So for actionable change rather than checkbox change?
Yeah, good question. Good question. I think brands can and should make decisions based on what's right over profits. And they can lead by example in creating awareness on inequalities and different causes that they might find valuable. So as a brand, I think it's important to be clear from day one what your value is and what your values are and what you've established from the beginning, and consider also, what your consumers are passionate about and what their values are, and then finding that intersection, and that way you can start to be an activist for those values, and also considering employees into the conversation too. So for companies to really do good, they also need to listen and engage with their employees. They're having a bigger voice these days, which is great. And so brands need to be open to hearing and implementing those kind of diverse perspectives from their own employees as well.
Exactly. Have that ergonomically designed table that's a free flow of creative thought, because I think this way, somebody else thinks this way. And can you imagine what would go into product development if you had all of these voices have a say in the development? And I love the fact that it becomes not only an external community that you're trying to build by the brand, like the Apple side of things, but you're also at the same time trying to build out that internal community. So there's literally that free flow of community adoption, right? Or adaptation even. And I just an example of a bad branding that didn't have the right like seats around the table would be the Big Pen. And I think a lot of women have probably heard this one, and they pinkified it, right? They took a Big Pen and they made it pink, and that's it. And then they promoted and branded it for women because it was pink. There was nothing else. There was no ergonomic designs or features to it. It was just pink. And so one of my favorite books in terms of branding is, and we've talked about this, is April Dunford in Obviously Awesome. And she talks about positioning things from a pain point rather than simply offering and different terminology, but rather than simply offering a vitamin solution, really drawing on a pain point. And if you have a solution, then it really wraps around that brand, right? What role can then brand play in supporting true actionable change? And when I mean actionable change, I don't mean like the smaller things. I mean about true movement type things. And this is where I want to start having the conversation about femtech. And femtech should be an aspect of every product that is developed that we're calling universal. So right now, women make up about 51% of the human population. Our skeletal systems are different. Our cardiovascular systems are different because we bleed once a month. So our neurovascular systems are different. Our physiological systems are different. I mean, we're built differently. And it's a wonder that we have been left out of not only product design, but history, education, all of these components. So a change is needed. What do you think? Because this is a massive issue. What do you think that a brand, just a simple creative brand strategy, could play in creating change? And I'm going to draw on the side of community, internal, external side.
Okay, so huge question. um,
Let's solve the world.
yeah. So, there's a process. There's a process for in marketing for brands. We define target markets. We narrowed down that universal approach to speak to specific audiences, and those that are most interested and likely to buy your products and services would be your target market. But we would do research. Uh, you'd have to do a lot of customer research, and really take a close look at the market to see where it's lacking and how we can make an effective change within that specific industry, for example, or within femtech. There's definitely probably quite a few things that would stand out, and certainly your Big Pen example is pretty common, I think, because I've also found that in the laxative industry, funny enough, I noticed that I was doing some reading about it, and they're marketing to women in pink boxes, much like the pink pen, but the product ingredients are the exact same as any other packaging. And I think it's really just a lack of knowledge, a lack of planning, a lack of strategy in their marketing approach.
And I guess that leads a little bit to false branding, right? Because if you have the exact same ingredients, or if you have, like an example, all medications are really designed because the research behind them are based on white men. There's a small contingent, or there is a contingent that is researched with women, but by the time the studies are released, the women are being left out of these studies. So when this medication comes out on the market, and women are having a lot more adverse effects, and I have a wonderful article on it. Please reach out to me if you'd like to find out more about this article. But what they're doing because they're having adverse effects, or that's not working, is they're microdosing. So this essentially, there could be some really bad effects or even deaths from this, because the product isn't designed for them. And that's the same with cars. We have a completely different skeletal system. Our pelvises tilt forward, whereas a men's pelvises are more square. So a seatbelt will hit here, and even our coccyx actually sits out where a man will sit down. So our coccyx will even sit like on a chair. Chairs are not designed for us properly, rather than the slide under like a man's would be. So the seat belts are not designed for us, nor are the chairs. So, and I say this all because when we're branding something that we don't even realize we're missing, how do you come across and teach an audience that something that they didn't realize they didn't have, without getting everybody up in arms going, oh, you're a man hater, and why are you trying to take my stuff away from me? When we're not doing that, we're just trying to add a new realm of safety and security into medication or car design or things like that. What role can branding play to be subtly persuasive? Ooh, I like that. Subtly persuasive.
Well, I probably by just doing it right. Getting in there, getting the research, and putting together the information that needs to get out there. And I would say, with a positive spin for sure. So, it probably would help also to have women in higher positions, that they could influence those decisions internally and start those conversations, and having those discussions. And if they're in charge of research, for example, would be a good one. And just stressing the importance of studying in those areas, and being the first to market, with a true solution for some of these products.
Now, femtech used to be defined as menstrual and sexual health, and we are trying to expand that out. But there is such a stigma in trying to promote or trying to build a company or a femtech company because the words that you have to use to describe your product are considered words we do not speak about. So things like vagina, when you're trying to portray something that perhaps for your pelvic floor, we know some amazing companies that work in this area, and it's in this arena, and they're so critically important to women's health. How do we then normalize medical terminology that should be part of our normal vernacular through branding? How do we normalize things like vagina?
Well, I think it takes time, and I think it takes brands who are bold enough to face that challenge. There are some people who are not comfortable with the word like vagina, and the fact is, it's, by law, if you were to create an ad, it's not an inappropriate thing to say. From a medical standpoint, it's the proper term. And if you were in the femtech space, and you would have to obviously use it in women's health. So I think by not avoiding those words, it would become more normal.
And it went because we've seen male campaigns that have built a whole campaign without saying anything. And I wonder if something like the Viagra campaign would be able to use that same methodology of introducing something without actually saying it. So what's being talked about, and the benefits of it, but we can dance around that version of it. Is that a possibility?
Yeah, I mean, I think if they're getting a positive response with products like Viagra, I'm sure that the same tactic could be used in women's health as well, for sure. And again, I think it takes some bold clients to want to enter into that space and take the leap.
Well, that's the problem, though, is that this is something that is required for. So I'll tell you a story where I'm desperately interested. Please, somebody take this one on. They really need to rebrand oral contraceptives. So my daughter had a period for 2 months straight. And that's a lot of blood for such a tiny child, because she's just turned 16. So, and she had to go into emerge so that she could have it emergency stopped. And they put her on oral contraceptive, which, by the way, is not really covered by in Canada. If you have a drug plan, it just doesn't fit because it's been sexualized. So rather it being the medication that she needs to function in society, honestly, if it had kept going, she could have been in some severe problems. She was already severely anemic, right? So she has this combination of things that she has to take: oral contraceptive, iron, and a glucose monitor. So she doesn't have the insulin side, so she can't have that piece. She can't with the iron because of whatever it might be, and then the birth control pill, because it's for sexual purposes, has been declassified as a medication. So let's take that on then as an example. What would be a good strategy in rebranding or asking for a rebrand? Ooh, that's an even better one. So as opposed to being the company that can actually do this, how do we convince companies to rebrand, or governments to rebrand, to take something that is being branded as sexual, right? Because every time we talk about femtech, it's sexualized somehow. It's menstrual, pregnancy, or sexual health, right? So how do we take something that has been branded one way, but is more often than not used another way?
Okay, well, first, I'm sorry your daughter had to go through that. I just wanted to acknowledge that.
Thank you.
It really is. It sounds like activism, perhaps. It's an old story, and through the years, it's just taken multiple voices to bring awareness to these circumstances. And there are so many I think different things where women are marginalized, I guess, and it's beyond my expertise, but because that's the step that comes before the branding. But it seems like it's a tough road, and people dedicate their lives to these things for sure, and creating awareness around these issues that we have. It seems to take a long time, but it does in fact work eventually. Women got to vote. I'm sure it was a long, hard road, but once that awareness is out there, I think the ball really starts to roll, and support comes in as well.
Right. But we are kind of seeing a few back steps that are in play right now. And honestly, if we try to truly affect change, from a corporate level, it needs to be monetized quickly, right? If we try to affect change from a political or government level, by the time you climb any ladders, they'll be voted out or it just gets tossed on a side panel. Now, we all know that if we stand up and stand proud with whatever underrepresented group we are with, we've seen how drastically and horrifyingly bad that ends. So I'm wondering if there is a different avenue that can be done that's more subtle. So, that there's the idea, and startups do this the best, right? Because there's these subtle companies that kind of come up and you look at them and all of a sudden you're using the product and you're like, but I've always been doing it this way. And that's the power of a startup, because they're the ones that are surrounded by all of these early adopters and all of these first followers. So my area of study is first followership. And it was really kind of stemmed by this amazing video. If you have the opportunity to see it, please do. It's a Derek Sievers video, and it's the Lone Follower, I think it's called. But look up followership and Derek Sievers. And it's a gentleman who is at a Woodstock style event, and he's out in the middle of the grass. He's obviously partaken in something, and he's dancing his version of dance, and he doesn't care. He's just being his own unique self. And then all of a sudden you'll see somebody else come along, and he's like, obviously doesn't know him, but starts to dance with him. He's a little bit more fluid, so there's a little bit more creativeness to his version of the dance. And he's also got his own following. So they all of a sudden join in, right? And then you've got this whole ring around this one single dancer. They've now validated that change, right? And then you start seeing these layers and layers and layers of people come on board, and that's creating a movement. So, but it was so subtle. It started with one inebriated gentleman dancing in the grass. So that should be a template for true change. Or could that be a template for true change? And that adoption of silly ideas that then take on this momentum because they have Steve Wozniak would be the lone guy dancing, and Steve Jobs comes along and he's the crazy first follower that puts the brand to it and builds it out. What do you think of that in terms of a strategy of a first followership strategy that matches along or can run alongside a branding effort?
Yeah, I think it's great. I think that's what we call viral, and that's what every brand aspires to, for sure. And their one idea will quickly catch fire, and can spread these days around the world very, very quickly.
Without even knowing it too, right? Because by the time you're doing it, you're like, well, no, I've always been doing it. I'm not even sure if I made it up or you made it up. And I guess that is the secret to it, is what is the recipe to something going viral? And that is every startup's dream. But it is truly the place where we have the most chance of creating something that could take on this new almost personality and change the direction of everything. I mean, the advent of the airplane and in the right hands, it became something amazing because it wasn't the inventor that became that actually brought it to fruition. And the same with the telephone and computers. And so there's this interesting journey, and then you finally get somebody to come along that is the creative mind that then brings it all together. And that's where I wanted to kind of go from the perspective of a fractional creative director. Then you are that, the corral, the person who kind of goes around and tells that story and builds up that creative change movement. So from a fractional, as a fractional creative director, and I want to kind of go on the femtech side, because femtech companies, they struggle to find great branding partners. They struggle with just getting their pitch across, right? Because male investors are going, oh, no, you just said that. No, I don't. So for femtech companies, how would they work within that fractional space for something that they have a massive market for and a massive need for? How would they then work with those first creative followers that are going to help them establish a brand, and more importantly, a way to effectively talk about that brand without using the faux pas narrative that we've been raised with?
Right, right. Well, I think partnerships are really important, and for a partnership for a femtech startup looking for someone in the brand space like me, I think it's really important to have a conversation. Have a conversation and see if you relate to one another. I know from my perspective, if I'm talking to a brand that I'm getting to know and kind of getting up to speed on what they do and how they do it, I look for synergies with myself and my own passions. So, what do I see in this brand that it is exciting for me? And, how can we use that to, spread the excitement to their target market audience? So, you need to really also feel like you're confident in their ability and the work that they've done previously, in their experience, and make sure that there are synergies. Make sure that someone is excited to work with your brand and has some knowledge of it or is willing to learn about it. And you should work with someone you feel that can relate to your business and or your product or your service. And just try to find that alignment.
And I like that the critical first step is really it starts with a conversation. So forever pitching, we think as founders, as startups, so that we're only going to be pitching to investors, but in fact, we're pitching to a lot more people, right?
Mm-hmm.
Every time you hire, any time you want to be hired, anytime you're a sales call is a pitch, anytime you're trying to bring in that next, great mind into your group, it's consistently pitching. So the critical first step is making sure that you have that first conversation and don't be afraid to have it. What would your recommendation be on what to avoid?
I would say avoid trying to go it alone, and invest in your brand strategy and your identity design with a professional that you trust, for sure. You need someone who believes in what you do. They become emotionally invested, much like a customer. And so someone who's invested in your brand and your business will give it their all, will be in the trenches with you, much like your employees. You have to sell the dream, and they have to believe it in order to go out there into the world to spread the good news, right? To be an advocate for your brand.
And I love the way you keep wrapping it back in. Like it's really got to come from internal to external, because if you don't believe in it with your core team, then how do you expect anybody else to believe what you're talking about? So I love how you kind of keep drawing on that. So one of the books that has been an amazing influence for me is excuse me, is the mom test. And so I want to take a little turn and talk about especially with the femtech side of things, and what role brand would be playing in that earliest stage when you've got that research, right? And you don't yet have a product, or you have that I'm calling it now the ugly duckling version of your product. With that earliest stage, what are some of the recommended things that you would suggest when you're just talking about an MVP? So something that hasn't fully been developed out, whether it's still just fully on research or just that ugly duckling side of things.
So in terms of how to position your brand at that stage?
How to position your, how to develop, what's the first, I think that when you first come out with something and you're still trying to figure out who your target audience is, who that persona is, how do you brand to gather information that'll tell you who the effective persona is that you should be going after, to narrow it down, so to speak?
Right. I think probably at that stage, you really do have to look at who you are first, and what it is that you stand for, and how you stand out in the market, and what your corporate mission is, and how do you want to achieve that. So when you feel solid about that, everything else kind of comes into play. So after that kind of brand strategy work, where we get to your why you're in business and what those values are, we can talk about what is your message? What is a powerful message that encapsulates what you do and how you do it and what you offer? And then you start to look at, okay, now how does that look? So visually, we use things like color, like line, shapes, and all of these things have psychology behind them. And for example, I just finished working with a meditation practitioner, and her brand was developed based around some of the things that we know about her clients, about her industry. We chose a color palette that had purples in it, which really represents spirituality, the blues in it for trust, and some lighter greens for growth and stability and peace and health. And people don't think about, when they look at, say, a logo or a website, and all of these colors and shapes and things take form and rush in, and they hit our senses in a way that we don't really comprehend. It's more of a feel. So that helps in putting that out there into the world.
And I'm not sure how many people kind of realized how critically important the color is, and because there's that ambiance that really kind of comes from it, and the lines, right? Whether it's a straight line or symmetrical, or symmetry, and they all depict this whole conversation that you're not actually having, but is being had for you. And I think that those elements, and the first time you spoke to me about the color and the line side of things, I went, oh, it's so subtle. So you literally could change somebody's mind before you even speak, just by presenting this narrative of color and symmetry. And you think about how critically that important that branding is on your pitch deck. Whether you're pitching to investors, whether you're pitching for sales, whether you're pitching to bring in a C-level, whatever it might be, because your branding starts internally, right? And then moves externally. And I think that in terms of femtech, you're able to promote something and put investors at ease, to perhaps bring in that whole maternal side of things, right? As opposed to, vagina pink, we're going to make everything change. It could be something that's very much more maternal and subtle, and then the conversation may flow easier. It just seems like an easier branding process, to have a lot of it being done without words, without you having to say something, because it's not as combative then, right? We're not up against something. It's a narrative that happens behind the scenes while you're having a subtle version of that conversation with your words. So I guess in terms of femtech, what does that, how much of a role could that subtle branding play? And are there any kind of things that off the top of your head that you can be like, oh, this is something that can soften femtech in the ears and eyes of investors, so that when you say the words that you need to say, they feel more clinical rather than sexual, right?
Yeah, yeah. And I think that really is in your brand positioning. And part of that strategy is developing a brand personality. And I take my clients through exercises to get to that personality. And ultimately, you land on things like, and this may not be specifically for femtech, but things on, are we friendly? Are we serious? Are we whimsical? Are we educational? And you find those adjectives that help to describe the brand as a human personality. And from that human personality branches out to the things like choosing our colors and choosing typography even. Is it whimsical, or is it something really serious and we want to be taken seriously? And that all gets weaved into your brand messaging and your tone of voice, which is also very, very important as part of your brand.
And again, from internal to external. Jennifer, this has been absolutely enthrallingly insightful. I have learned so much, and I think that I'm gonna reiterate. I really enjoy how you took all of the external pieces and grounded them with internal. So your team is really pivotal and critical in growing your company and developing this brand. The brand comes from within, and then the external side of it, by being able to change, and its changes is more than just a voice, right? It's more than just vernacular. It is really a whole set of different senses that are being challenged, not challenged, that are being subtly made aware.
Persuading.
Oh yes, persuading, right? And it's simply as a color and lines and just key vernacular elements that kind of propose this persuasion, right? Subtle persuasion.
Right.
So I truly enjoyed this conversation. I know that there's so much more that I'd like to find out about, and I'm sure our audience would love to hear more as well. So we'll share your details if anybody would like to get in touch with Jennifer. Again, she is a fractional creative. Oh, you have a slew of titles as well. I'm just actually looking at it. There's so you've also been a board member. So this is also very, very critical because there is a very strong strategy that also goes along with bringing in an advisor, and for all the startups out there that don't know that, you can bring an advisor in on shared equity as well, as paid. So they bring in a voice or a reflection of an industry that you may not have. So I know, Jennifer, you've sat on boards before. I'm not sure if you have, well, you've advised me, right? So you are an advisor as well, and a fractional creative. And from the fractional creativity side, it's so critical to have somebody that understands the very earliest stages When an idea is just kind of coming to fruition, it's a different aspect. And sometimes you just need somebody external to come in and hold your hand, even if you have somebody that's marketing, just to have them think differently. So I would encourage anybody to reach out to Jennifer and partake in her plethora of skills and her creativity, especially from having a woman around the table to help brand that out and bring a different creative voice to your product, to your company. Jennifer, do you have any last words of wisdom in terms of brand and creativity?
Well, I'm very happy to have those conversations, and each client is unique and has their own unique special qualities that we try to bring out in our messaging and in our branding. And I'm happy to have those conversations with anyone who's interested.
Wonderful. And I'm just going to pitch another book as well, Brad Feld, so Startup Boards as well. So if the board conversations we were just having kind of went, oh my gosh, what do I do with that? This will help help you kind of navigate what that early version of a board means. There's also Jason Kalikanakis, who talks about the advisor side of things and how to negotiate to have a brilliant mind on your advisory board. This has been wonderful. Thank you so much, Jennifer. I have left the details of how to connect with you in the webinar chat, but we'll also be sharing those on YouTube in the show notes. Have an absolutely amazing world, and I hope you'll join us next time as we further attempt to redefine what universal means to include the other portions of the human population. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.